You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 25th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme.
Our nation is back. Bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before.
US President Donald Trump sells at considerable length the virtues of his nation and himself. Later in the show,
they really spend on defense to defend Germany, to defend Europe. But I think it needs to make sure that in 10 years down the road, European neighbors are still comfortable with an economic and militarily dominant Germany in Europe.
Is Europe really ready for Germany to become a major military power again? We will also round up the latest business news and we'll hear from our team at Milan Fashion Week. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. US President Donald Trump last night delivered a State of the Union address which, whatever quibbles there may have been about quality, did not stint on quantity at just short of 108 minutes. It was the longest State of the Union ever delivered, eclipsing by some margin the 89 minutes for which President Bill Clinton went on in 2000. And before anybody writes in, the 100 minutes Trump racked up before Congress roughly this time last year was not a formal State of the Union as such, so it doesn't count. So there. And let's hear it for President Richard Nixon, who in 1972 knocked it all over in less than half an hour. Well, I'm joined with more by H.J. Mai, a reporter based in Washington, D.C. H.J., first of all, do we think Trump, given the recent speculation about his general state of health, was trying to prove something by going on so long?
I'm not sure that he wanted to prove anything, in terms of disputing any of those rumors that are out there when it comes to his health. I think, he seemed like when he walked in he seemed like he's just really enjoying those moments. I mean, as you know, when he's on campaign events, he sometimes goes on for 2 hours plus. So I think, he's just really in his element when he's, in the spotlight and has all eyes on him. I think he's just really enjoying it and it fires him up. So I think that had more to do with that and that he wanted to put out there, how successful, in his words, he has been during this first year.
Well, as far as it was possible to tell, and in compare and contrast with those rallies to which you allude, did he mostly stick to the script?
Yeah, he actually did this time. Sometimes he goes very much off script, but he actually stuck to it. I mean, I think, everybody within the Republican Party and within the White House has realized that, with a look ahead to this year's midterms, it's all about the economy. It's all about affordability. And, he very much stuck to those themes. I think there was a lot of patriotism yesterday, with the U.S. hockey team there and, some military members that he honored. But I think he stuck to, trying to tell people how his government, how he himself is trying to reduce costs for them. And so he stuck to that script. He blamed Democrats for why it hasn't happened yet. And so, yeah, it was actually, compared to some of his other, public outings, he very much, stuck to what he was supposed to do.
Well, in the course of that near 2 hours, did he actually have any policy announcements as such?
No, just a lot of real, I would say, the demands of Congress to do something that he wants to do. I mean, he announced a couple of small things, but they were not new. I mean, he has announced them before, like, the fact that he wants to ban Wall Street from buying, homes as investment property. He has announced that before. He wants Congress to get on top of that and actually codify it. He wants to reduce the costs of different types of medicine. He wants to, reshape basically Obamacare and cut out to some degree the insurance companies who he claims, have made billions, and wants to actually give, money directly to the people and let them decide. And, he also, talked once again about his Trump accounts, which is, every child born during his administration in the U.S., if they apply, they will get $1,000 and, they're supposed to invest that. And the claim is by the government that, by the age of 18, it would be a six-figure amount that parents and kids could rack up over the next 18 years.
He did inevitably have a couple of goes at winding up his Democratic opposition. We do have a clip of one.
The American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Isn't that a shame? You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself.
HJ, is there a hint there of how the Republicans plan to approach the midterms in November? Are they going to go back to tarring the Democratic Party as the party of open borders?
I think, they would like to do that because it clearly was successful in 2024. Obviously, they can't really go with that script anymore because, Trump and the administration have really made sure that the border is about as secure as you can have a border at the moment. The number of, illegal entrances across the southern border are basically negligible. But in general, he definitely wants to, portray the Democratic Party as the party, that cares more about, foreign policy, about, other people, foreigners coming to the country than actually caring about American people. And I think, that clip you just played there illustrated that. He basically, he told Democrats, if you're in agreement with me that we should, first and foremost think about our own people, stand up. And Democrats didn't. And then, as you heard, he called them out. And there were several other moments like this, where, he talked about the way that Democrats have handled crime, for example, and he called them crazy and sick people. So, yeah, he tries to once again, throw them under the bus when it comes to that, because at the moment, Democrats have clearly the upper hand when it comes to the issue of affordability.
Well, on the subject of foreign policy, the world is still waiting to see whether or not the United States will do anything with this armada it is assembling off the coast of Iran. Did he offer any hints as to where he's going with that?
No, just, he reiterated what he said before, that his first choice would be diplomacy. He would like to, get to some agreement with Iran. But once again, he's willing, if that doesn't happen, he's willing, to consider taking action. But no, there was nothing new in his speech. He once again pointed out how great of a peacemaker he is. But when it comes to exactly what his plans are in the Middle East, no, he has not given us any further indication.
H.J. Mai, thank you as always for joining us. You are listening to The Briefing. Here is Monica Lillis with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Germany's Chancellor has arrived in China, marking the leader's first visit to the nation since taking office last year. Diplomats in Berlin hope Friedrich Merz will strike a firmer tone on trade with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, and reduce economic dependence on the world's second largest economy. The pair will also discuss the war in Ukraine. Japan has laid out plans to deploy surface-to-air missiles to a remote island near Taiwan by March 2031. It's the first time the nation has specified a timeline for missile deployment to Yonaguni Island since 2022. This comes as tensions between Beijing and Tokyo over Taiwan continue to run high. And the director of the Louvre Museum in Paris has resigned, just months after a high-profile theft of France's crown jewels. French President Emmanuel Macron accepted Laurence Dakar's resignation on Tuesday, describing it as an act of responsibility. The heist exposed deep security and infrastructure failures at the world's most visited museum. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Monica. To Germany now, a country that is currently undergoing its most significant defence overhaul since reunification in 1990. However, recent geopolitical events, including the ongoing war in Ukraine, as well as the re-election of US President Donald Trump, have spurred the nation to reconsider their options. But how significant is this for a country with a complicated military history? To find out, Monocle's Chris Chermak spoke to Liana Fix, Senior Fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. Chris started by asking her whether she found it surprising that European allies weren't more considerate of what rearmament might mean for Germany.
I think at that time, Germany's rearmament was still seen as small-scale rearmament, right? There was a ceiling to the money that Germany wanted to spend, and the general mood was still very much, we want Germany to spend more. This is not enough what Germany is doing. Or in the words of the current and former Polish Foreign Minister, Władysław Sikorski, we fear German inaction more than we fear German power. But that has shifted with the election of Germany's new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, from the Conservatives, and with the election of Donald Trump, because it was the election of Donald Trump much more than the invasion of Ukraine that has really opened the floodgates of German military spending.
It has opened the floodgates, as you say, with Friedrich Merz, almost so as you write also, this open-ended commitment to defense spending, also above deficit spending. But again, to go back to this idea that this is initially what people like Radek Sikorski and others wanted from Germany, did the fact that Merz then comes in and announces this unlimited spending catch Europeans off guard? It's like they got what they wanted.
Absolutely. And that's also the German argument these days when you say, look, what are you thinking about how you're going to embed German power in Europe? How are you going to balance this and so on? They usually say, well, look, the Europeans asked for that, so now they should not complain. Of course, that's not a way of handling power relations in Europe. But I think the questions of how is Germany going to spend that money and the realization how much money that actually is. So by 2029, Germany is going to spend 162 billion euros, which is the current French and British defense budget combined, roughly, right? It puts Germany in the fourth place of military spenders worldwide and not too far behind Russia. And it's unlikely that France and the UK will be able to catch up with that kind of spending because both don't have the fiscal flexibility to do that. So once these kinds of, facts settled in, there were questions coming up about, how European is this going to be? How will Germany balance this increase in power with its European neighbors? And that's, I think, the state where we are now.
Well, talk more about that European side, because Germany has certainly tried to couch its military development as within Europe, as you write in your article as well, stationing troops in the Baltics. It's always done this to shield itself from any suggestion that this is about, a Germany alone military build-up. But as you also note, that hasn't necessarily been reflected in things like joint procurement, for example.
To be fair to German policymakers, that is not fake, right? German policymakers, they really spend on defense to defend Germany, to defend Europe. They are fully convinced of that. There's a permanent brigade of 5,000 German soldiers that will be stationed in Lithuania. So that's not, a fig leaf to come to some kind of, militaristic or hegemonic Germany behind sort of the scenes. That is actually what German policymakers want and what they truly believe. The only problem is that just by using this rhetoric, just by using confidence building with the stationing of troops and so on, that is not a structural response to questions of balance and power in Europe, right? That's a, tactical policy response, in some ways, even like only a cosmetic response. But in Germany's history, whenever Germany had an increase in power under Konrad Adenauer, when he founded the German army, when Germany was reunified under Helmut Kohl, there was always a structural component that I called the golden handcuffs that were put on German power. And I don't think we are there yet. German policymakers believe it's enough to build confidence. It's enough to demonstrate that we have a brigade in Lithuania. This is all for Europe. But I think it needs more to make sure that in, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, European neighbors are still comfortable with an economic and militarily dominant Germany in Europe.
Liana, when it comes to the concerns that Europeans might have 5-10 years down the line, how much of that is about also the potential shifts within German politics? The idea that, say, the alternative for Germany, the far right, could regain power. Is that where this sort of unease comes from, or is there something else as well?
So there are two versions sort of the future where German dominance could become a problem. The one is the nightmare version, right? The AfD, which is one of the most radical right-wing parties in Europe, which aims to have a militarily independent Germany, which aims for appeasement with Russia. That this AfD comes to power, something that German politicians always try to avoid through a firewall, not allowing them into any power positions. That would be the nightmare scenario and really the worst case scenario. But there's also a less radical scenario, and that is that even if Germany remains under central leadership, that at some point, remember, for example, the Eurozone crisis, the financial crisis, the problems with Greece, at some point, Germany could just be perceived as too dominant, not because it wants to be hegemonic, not because it wants to control Europe, but just because it's too big to be worked around in Europe, right? And therefore, it's the one country that needs to call the shot or say yes or no on all these issues. And that, again, is not something that France is excited about. It's not something that Poland is excited about as a smaller member state. They want to make sure that Germany is pulling its weight, but that it's not throwing its weight around. And I think that's a crucial difference.
That was Liana Fix, Senior Fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations, speaking to Monocle's Chris Chermak. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Time now to take a look at the latest business news. We're joined by Ewan Potts at Bloomberg. Ewan, first of all, increased investment plans from the German utility company E.ON. What are they suddenly so confident about?
Hello, Andrew. Yeah, E.ON says it's to spend 48 billion euros between now and the end of the decade, with the vast bulk of that earmarked for its energy networks business. Now, the German company's move is really a response to two things. The first is a surge in wind and solar projects. They all need connecting up to the grid across Europe and much of the world. Our grid is designed for the days of coal-fired generation, and the coal power plants are not in the same place as the wind and solar plants. So that means they all need to be connected up, which is going to cost a huge amount of money. So E.ON is going to be spending on building out that grid. And secondly, this is about our old friend, the AI boom, all those new electricity-hungry data centres, and also more and more electric cars are going to need a lot of extra power. So this is really an investment story that's been playing out for a while now. And when it comes to those hundreds and hundreds of billions being invested in AI by the likes of Microsoft and Amazon, truth be told, no one knows whether that's going to turn out to be a genius move or a total waste of money. But what is certain is that if you're on the receiving end of all of that largesse, making electrical equipment or generating power, then you are onto a winner. Talking of which, we're going to get an earnings update later today from the company at the very centre of all of this, and that is chipmaker NVIDIA. A little reminder that NVIDIA is the world's most valuable company, worth a cool $4.7 trillion. And just to put that in a bit of context, the entire FTSE 100 here in London is worth less than $3 trillion.
Well, back in the UK, Ewan, Diageo, the large-scale distiller, seems to think it's forgotten how to serve its customers.
Yeah, Diageo is one of the companies that makes up the FTSE 100. It shares actually the worst performers on the index today. Not for the first time, Diageo, which is the world's biggest booze company, has disappointed investors. They're now questioning whether it's capable, to misquote an old phrase, of organising a party in a brewery. The company's new boss, Dave Lewis, formerly of Tesco, is attempting to turn the business around. He says that customer service levels in many regions are really not acceptable, to use his words. And as well as not for delivering for customers, Diageo is facing a structural problem that global alcohol consumption is falling, and that appears to be a multi-year trend. And Diageo is also suffering from something of a post-COVID hangover. Lockdown was a real boon for drinks makers. Stay-at-home consumers splurged on expensive cocktails. But after all of that pandemic unpleasantness was over, we all found other things to spend our money on. And investors also find the other things to spend their money on today. Diageo shares currently down just under 9%.
Just finally, Ewan, do Diageo, or I guess anybody else in that sector, seem to have any ideas about what to do about the fact that, as you point out, people, especially younger generations, are simply drinking less?
Yeah, it's interesting you point out the generational differences, because it is a trend that seems to be with us now for the long term. Alcohol consumption is falling year on year. And as you say, a lot of Gen Z just don't drink at all. One of the things which Diageo is pivoting towards fairly obviously is alcohol-free. So these 0% beers, 0% spirits, which of course have a very high profit margin because many of them are priced at the same level. In fact, I've seen some of them actually priced at a higher price point than drinks with alcohol in. But of course, there's no duty to pay. So they are very profitable. And until recently, they were a very tiny part of the business, but they are growing very rapidly. So they're certainly moving in that direction. But of course, the vast bulk of the business is on flogging alcohol. So when that market is shrinking, that is a bit of a problem for the likes of Diageo.
Ewan Potts, thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. Now, no sooner had Milan completed the furling of its Olympic decorations than it was unfurling the Milan Fashion Week equivalents. And a reminder that all 10 episodes of Monocle in Milan, broadcast during the recently concluded Winter Games, are available on our website. Milan Fashion Week got properly underway yesterday, and obviously among the better-dressed attendees is Monocle's Associate Editor for Design and Fashion, Grace Charlton. Grace, Milan Fashion Week usually has this moment of the calendar more or less to itself, but this time it is squeezed in between the Winter Olympics and, of course, the Winter Paralympic Games. Is it struggling to impose itself any more or less than usual?
No, it's pretty, it really is relentless for Milan. There's no rest for the wicked. I think the city is taking it in its stride. There's a little bit more traffic than usual, but hey, it's Italy, they can get used to that.
Indeed they can. We did speak to several guests about Milan's crowded calendar while we were in Milan in the last couple of weeks. As one of them did say, it's always something week. For those who have not experienced Milan Fashion Week, though, give us some sense of what actually occurs when you're in the middle of it.
So there's a lot of, I want to call it a circus, maybe. There are a lot of Mercedes-Benz black cars sort of beeping at each other as they all fight to get to a venue. There's always this sort of palaver of the street style photography. In Milan, they also get lots of celebrities to come and sit front row. So actually a big part of Fashion Weeks that I've noticed growing in the past few years is the K-pop fans screaming outside of shows, trying to see their favorite K-pop star, enter the venue. So it's a very high energy sort of situation.
Is it, though, not the case that there is a somewhat reduced schedule this year? Is that due to the encroachment of Olympics on either side of it?
I wonder, or I think brands are sort of choosing to put their efforts into Paris. But that being said, there are some really exciting things happening this season in Milan. For example, in about 30 minutes, I'm going to be at the Fendi show where Maria Grazia Chiuri is going to be making her women's wear debut. So she headed up Dior for many years, but actually she started her career at Fendi in, the late 1980s. So it's a little bit of a full circle moment, and she's one of the only women who's heading up a house, and she's very vocal about being a feminist and what this means and her frustrations. And then this weekend there will also be Demna, a somewhat controversial designer from Georgia who used to be at Balenciaga. He's going to be making his first show debut with Gucci. So there is some exciting stuff, even though, yes, the schedule is quite tight and budgets are tighter, but that's been the narrative for a few years now.
Going back to the Fendi show, which for the reasons you enumerated will obviously be much anticipated, but do you have any idea in advance what to anticipate? Do you get given any, tastes or leaks of what you can expect?
So I have a theory because she made a comment a few weeks ago, and I'm so glad I'm talking to you, Andrew Muller, because we discussed the return of, Milan traffic, the return of fur in the sort of public consciousness as maybe more of a sustainable decision compared to fake fur. So she said that she wants to reincorporate fur into Fendi. Fendi is known for its fur, but she sort of wants to have this program of, bringing in vintage furs and readapting them, creating new shapes with what is already done. And she said something like, I've inherited so many fur coats from my grandmother and my own mother. And I was like, well, lucky you, Maria Grazia. I'm not in the same boat, but hopefully other people are.
I mean, are you expecting any of the collections to acknowledge either explicitly or implicitly the fact that it has been in recent years harder and harder to sell this stuff?
I'm assuming that Miuccia Prada will continue to rise to the challenge of this discussion. She's very vocal about this topic. At the menswear show that happened a few weeks ago, I went backstage and she was talking about how, you still need to create beauty even though it's like really hard. And she said it's hard as a designer to sort of hold these two conflicting realities of, wanting to bring joy, create beauty, but doing it within a context that isn't necessarily beautiful, like politically, economically. She's someone who really acknowledges it head on rather than trying to just seek escapism.
I mean, do you get any sense of the houses, I guess, literally tailoring their collections to the moment, or is everybody sort of crossing their fingers, hoping the pendulum swings back and that people will once again start purchasing more high-end couture?
Well, I think that's a really good question. What I've noticed is that a lot of collections are getting a lot longer, and there are about 80 looks per collection now. It seems like what designers are actually trying to do is sort of create something for everybody, and sort of throw as much at the wall and seeing what sticks or what sells. Like there's less of a sort of edited, cohesive, tight vision. It's more of a like all-encompassing. Maybe someone will like this T-shirt, maybe someone will like this outfit. So I think actually that's how designers are responding.
And I know we're quite early into Milan Fashion Week, but have you personally seen anything yet that you are thinking about? Is there a way I can somehow get this out in my own suitcase with the expense filed under hotel laundry?
I would never do that, Andrew. What kind of accusation is this? No, always it's very inspiring. I adore Jill Sander. The collection showed this morning. I would love, a bit of a minimalist 90s pencil skirt moment, but no, I won't go shopping on the company card if anyone from finance is listening.
As they doubtless are, extremely carefully. And just finally, what is next on your schedule over the next few days? What are you most looking forward to?
So I am looking forward to Mani, another debut by a young Belgian designer called Meryl Roger. I'm very much looking forward to Gucci. I also always adore Prada. And today I've got Etro as well, which is always a fun one, and then Maison Margiela 6 or MM6, which will be a little bit of a party.
Enjoy. Grace Charlton, Monocle's Associate Editor for Design and Fashion at Milan Fashion Week. Of course, stay tuned across all Monocle Radio shows for further coverage of that. And that is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis, our researcher was Annalise Maynard, and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. The Briefing returns tomorrow at the same time, midday London. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.